Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got for you all the first of a series of 4 reviews we're going to be doing to tie in to our Legends book reviews we've been doing recently. So, for those longtime fans on our channel of our Legends coverage, we used to do a Star Wars Legends book club where we'd go really in depth, talk for 20 to 45 minutes about this particular book and all sorts of ways, talk full spoilers and all of that. We have shifted the format of that. So, for those of you interested, we will be running a live stream on December 11th, where we are going to be talking about all 4 of Michael Stackpole's X-Wing novels, the first 4 from his original Rogue Squadron series. We're going to talk about all 4 of those in that live stream in full spoilers. But today, we are going to be reviewing the first book, X-Wing Rogue Squadron, the one that kickstarted everything. We're going to be giving you a non-spoiler review. So this is our non-spoiler thoughts just about plot and characters and everything that makes this book great. We're going to let you know all of that stuff in this review. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of that content. Again, pencil that live in on December 11th so you can join us to discuss full spoilers about this novel and the other 3 that we will be getting to as well. And we will be having reviews out for those other 3. If you're interested in Wraith Squadron, I did just put out reviews for all 3 of those as they released with the Essential Legends collection. And we're going to continue to drop new Star Wars Legends book reviews, non-spoiler, alongside the Essential Legends collection releases. So make sure you check all those out. There will be links to the playlist in this video's cards. All right, without further ado, let's get into the review for X-Wing Rogue Squadron. So, as always, we start out our book reviews reviewing the writing, the plot, the structure of the novel, everything that makes up the novel of X-Wing Rogue Squadron in this case. And Sanak, I'm going to pass it to you first. What were your thoughts on the way Michael Stackpole wrote this novel and started to craft what eventually became a 10-book long X-Wing series?
It's definitely a really fun start to this X-Wing series. I think, just to be very clear with people, this is not the most original of the books. By far, it's very much a Top Gun with X-Wing pilots, but there's some really interesting elements to it. I think what really propels the story to kick off with is that you're putting all these unknown, nameless pilots. Yes, you kind of start off with the lead pilot, the lead hero of this whole saga with Cornhorn being told off that he's no Luke Skywalker, right? So there's some obvious things kind of connecting here and there, but this is a fresh group of unknowns outside of Wedge leading them. And yes, if you've read some of the comics and stuff like that, you might have seen some of the other characters, but it's new, it's fresh, and it's Top Gun, right? So you want to see how they kind of compete against each other, how they pick up their training, how they're kind of duped in some ways and like pushed to their limits. And it's pretty interesting. But I think what really pushes the plot forward mostly is that these characters are really put together for a lot of political reasons. They're not necessarily just the best of the best. They are very good. Some of them are the best of the best, but we're also here to be kind of like a commando unit, have skills that can be applied for a variety of situations to evolve the Rogue Squadron from a place of necessity to a place of kind of make the first few steps of connecting all these separate parts of this newly formed new republic that had a common cause at one point, but now it's like, does everyone want to stay on the same page? Is everyone even trying to stay on the same page? So they understand that they're like a very symbolic unit. And I really did appreciate a lot of the initial struggles and how they painted some of the relationships and dynamics with their characters. What also really does push this story is that they are tracking towards sort of this unknown goal. Like, it's not very clear to the pilots yet which direction they're going. So they're kind of jumping from staging ground to staging ground, testing out their skills and being pushed into new situations a little faster than they ever expected to. That is a really key driving force here, but it's pretty interesting. The final battle kind of repeats itself twice in this book. One is a outright failure, another is a victory snatched from the jaws of defeat at Borlace, and I think overall pretty solid. You get to see some great action-packed moments, but I wouldn't necessarily say like this is something that is wholly original even by Star Wars standards.
Yeah, the Rogue Squadron book is an interesting one, especially when you compare it to the entirety of the X-Wing franchise and what it ultimately became and what it was prior. A lot of people forget the X-Wing franchise started as comic books. It started with comic books first, and then it morphed into these novels, and the comics were also written by Stackpole. And so it was this thing that changed and ultimately had a legacy to continue, but also the end game of where we were with a lot of Bantam at the time, which was New Republic storytelling, Thrawn, all the other stuff that was going on, characters that had been introduced in other books like Warlord Zinj. How are we going to connect it to all these other Imperials while also telling basically the true end of the post Return of the Jedi, like powerful Imperials, the march towards Coruscant eventually, and all those different things really play into here where we get a rebooted Rogue Squadron team up where versus the one we have in the comics. And of course, you have the heart and soul of this whole series, Wedge Antilles, who is leading that, but it is a character book. Out of all four of these, Rogue Squadron is the one that is the most ensemble character centric too. You have Corn Horn, obviously the main character, Bror Jace as well. Kirtan Lore plays a big part when you're talking about the Imperial side. And so there is an ensemble here that's not as focused in the other three. And I think that makes the writing here particularly different. Top Gun is the basis for this, as each X Wing book eventually adopts a very specific genre to play out its story. And here, this is the one that's the most high flying, fun, a lot of rivalries and infighting within the group. It is the one that creates the team. And in that way, Stackpole does a more cliche job, but also a very good job writing that entire buildup. And I think this book works really well as an origin point. But like you said, this one's not going to give you the most creative plotting. It's not going to give you the most interesting plot points. It is the beginning. And I think for a beginning, Stackpole does a pretty admirable job crafting that start and to that journey. I also listened to this via audiobook on my reread back in 2022 when it came out originally. That was also an elevated experience. Mark Thompson does the audiobook for not just these four, but also the three Wraith Squadron books. And I assume they will eventually do Isard's Revenge and Starfighters of Adamar as well. But Mark Thompson does a great narration. So if that is something you're interested in, tracking this entire series, you can listen to all 8 books right now via audiobook format as well. So I wanted to give that a little shout out as well. And the production value around the audiobooks is incredibly high, as it always is. But let's move into these characters of Rogue Squadron, because like I was saying, this is a character-centric book where some of the other books in Stackpole's Rogue Squadron especially are more plot-centric, like the next couple we'll get to. This one certainly hones in on characters. So you have the one character who's in every X-Wing book. You have Wedge Antilles leading the charge here, and he is excellent as always. But of course, you have the first non-Wedge Antilles introduced protagonist of this series, Corran Horn. This is his story. This is the one that kicks off his journey. Bror Jace, another big character, Kirtan Lore for the Empire, the early onsets of some of the things with Isard, and the rest of the Rogue Squadron team. Sanak, I'm going to pass it to you. Who were some of the standout characters to you, maybe besides the obvious ones, on top of the obvious ones? And what did you think overall of the way Stackpole crafted the characters in this novel?
Well, for me, obviously, it is going to be Corran Horn. I know he is a bit of like a Gary Stew of some sorts because everything comes easy, like not just the starfighter stuff, the relationships. And even though he has no personality for it, especially with his backstory, with some of his traumas and struggles, and his journey kind of reaching into Rogue Squadron. And this is a good book to really lay that foundation. Obviously, it has to be his origin, but you get to see that you are kind of capturing this man mid-flight, kind of drifting, and this is just a way out. This is just a way to progress in life and stay away, stay one step ahead from of his enemies, and most notably Kirtan Lore, he's had a close working relationship with before, but they both absolutely hate each other's guts. And it's really interesting to see kind of this like abrasive protectiveness that he has of his own journey, who he is. he doesn't get along with the squad. He really doesn't for a long time. And even though he's a gifted starfighter, that doesn't mean he's a gifted team player. And this is really him learning how to open up and connect to people on a personal and a professional level. Maybe not his most interesting book, but it is definitely most essential to kickstarting his journey. This is also probably one of the better appearances for Kirtan Lore. I think he's a pretty interesting character throughout these first four books, but especially here, you get to see him basically have the upper hand here. You get to see his photographic memory. You get to see how he plans and works around his relationship with Corrin. You get to see Imperial that Izard especially points out the flaws of who he is, like how he gets like honed in on certain things, and that's what his enemies are exposing. They know you just as well as you know them, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. It is an Imperial that is thoughtful, but still has the flaws of the Imperial, and I thought that was a pretty good representation. Yeah, I mean, those two are definitely the standouts for me. Wedge, obviously, always wondering like, why am I still alive? But like, I have to keep fighting. I have to make sure this group that is so inexperienced and kind of rushed out even faster than they ever were to like live and survive. And there are casualties here. I think there are some pretty like shocking deaths too, and some of them I wouldn't say are like entirely earned for me, but it is playing with more of the realities of war. So that was pretty good. I like Mirex as a character, but this is not necessarily the book that she gets a lot of work in. And some of it is convenient with her relationships in the book. I won't deny that. But I'm a big fan of Navarro Wen. I really like him. This is definitely like one of the first examples of Twi'leks kind of being treated in the EU as more than just cannon fodder or just slaves. Like this is a character who's rich in his own culture, but is able to have an interesting profession outside of being a starfighter pilot who kind of works as the glue for so many of these characters. So he kind of stood out for me pretty easily on. But of course, my favorite, like almost comedic character has to be Oral. I just like him. He's always in third person and how he like works with the team, works with Corn especially. Really good stuff there. So yeah, those would be some of my picks.
Yeah, I'm going to echo most of those. I think for me, Wedge is still my favorite character to come out of most of these books. I think the way you track his journey, and obviously it is a little bit of a bias in having read the rest, but like seeing where he begins to where he ends up, it is really interesting to follow him progress as a leader. And you really see those leadership qualities continue to come out. He has led before, but not led a group of people with this many strong personalities and juggling this many things in New Republic politics, or at this point, still slightly post rebellion politics. So there's still a lot of interesting things for Wedge to do and a lot of room for him to grow. But Corrin is the standout. Like I mentioned earlier, it's an ensemble story because you're getting to know everybody, but Corrin is the POV you see pretty much everything through. It's through his eyes and Wedge's eyes that you meet the rest of these characters. The colorful cast of characters here don't really come in through other people's perspectives. So Corrin is the one you're rooting for. He's the one that is abrasive though, and he has flaws, and you do root against him in some facets, but having him have a rival like Bror Jace, who's not necessarily the most likable character, but someone who's I think certainly helps push Corrin here, and you see the way he helps push and guide Corrin, especially throughout his journey throughout the whole series. I appreciated that. Oral will always be one of my favorite characters in all of these books, so can't wait to talk more about Oral throughout the series. But this is a Corrin and Wedge book predominantly, with the other variety of characters. And as for the villains, I agree. Kirtan Lore, I think, progressively gets less interesting throughout each book in the series, but here he starts as a true antagonistic force to Corrin and the Rogues, especially. And it's interesting to track where he goes and how he kind of devolves throughout the series. But here, I really did enjoy what Kirtan has to do, and he is a strong antagonist in this story. So we're going to wrap up our review right here with a score out of 5. Sanak, I'm going to pass it to you. What would you rate X-Wing Rogue Squadron out of 5?
Out of 5, I would give it a 3.25 for me. It does pretty well in what it's trying to do. It sticks to a fairly simple plot, and it does have some interesting effects and twists and turns, especially amongst like the early New Republic military leadership and how they're compared and contrasted with Wedge and his unit of the Rogue Squadron. I thought all of that was pretty fascinating. Like I said, Kiritan really has a big role in this story, and how he's countering is pretty exciting to see, especially learning to counter more and more as the rogues are getting closer and more comfortable, and Korn is starting to unlock himself and therefore unlock the squadron. But it is very much a Top Gun film turned into a book, right? You can even say like the Borges and the Court and Horn relationship is Iceman and Maverick, right? So it is playing off of a lot of established tropes, but combat is fun to read. This is the one book of the series that is purely focused on that to every degree. So if you really want to know how these pilots, these X-wing pilots throughout all of Star Wars really work, this is how they do it. And yeah, it's just a solid book all around.
Yeah, I really enjoy this as a start. To me, it's not one of my favorites of the X-Wing series, but I'd still give it a 3.75 out of 5. I really like this story. It's exciting, it's fun. The world building and the team building is really strong. The character work here is exciting, and the way it ultimately builds and connects to the rest of the X-Wing novels in general, but especially Stackpole's work. I think he has a solid foundation laid here for what he ultimately does, and I do enjoy pretty much everything he has here. It's a bit more formulaic than he usually goes, but as a start, I think it's a really strong start and certainly a book that is worth your time. So let us know what you think of X-Wing Rogue Squadron in the comments below. Have you read this book? Did you watch this review to see if you should read this book? Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this novel overall, and stay tuned for the reviews for the next 3 X-Wing books from Michael Stackpole, and we will be getting you Wedge's Gamble next, the second book in the series. If you're wanting to check out non-spoiler reviews for the Wraith Squadron series, you can check those out on the channel, as well as other reviews for many other Legends novels, including The Force Unleashed most recently. So check those out on the channel, as well as constantly we're reviewing Star Wars canon books when they are released. So if you're somebody who is interested in Star Wars books, Star Wars Lads is your one-stop shop. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.